I'm excited to introduce the next panel to you, Tech for Good. And I don't know about you, but for me, the amount of technology and digital transformation is almost neck-breaking. Personally, it's on a daily basis. At work, it's almost weekly. I am learning about new innovations that we could be bringing into our organization. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for Zai Lab, a global biotech healthcare organization, and we're always looking for ways to strengthen our sustainable, responsible procurement. So I am excited to start this conversation, and I want to bring on now stage the other panelists, including Lubomila, I apologize, the co-founder and CEO of Plan A, Mark, who is the founder and CEO of Vizibl, and Ulrike, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Henkel. Lubomila, I apologize. Thank you for joining me. So I kind of helped level set a little bit about what this panel was, but I'd love for them to hear it from you. So you see their bios, and Ulrike, I'm going to start with you. As a fellow practitioner in sustainability, talking to an audience of procurement professionals, how would you define tech for good?
Yeah. Well, let's perhaps start with defining good, which in this context here means sustainability, and I would wager that if we'd ask the audience of about 100 what sustainability is, probably we have 100 different definitions of it. And very clearly, I think the challenge with this topic is that it also has been moving and changing over the years. So now, I think increasingly it is very clearly the environmental side of it, of course, the environmental protection. There are many things in there, climate first, but there are circular economy, nature, etc. The social pillar, right? How do we contribute to the betterment and progress of society? But then also, how do we as companies act? How do we govern ourselves? How do we make decisions? How do we bring sustainability in our idea of growth as well, ultimately? So this ESG thinking is really increasingly what defines what sustainability is. So it's quite complex, has many topics. And that complexity then goes, you have to translate that complexity onto an organization. And an organization that is 150 years nearly old, has various businesses, and that then translates over into the supply chain, right? That means we have to not only improve, we also have to really go for transformation, and we have to go for transformation very, very fast with these sort of very established processes, institutions, if you like, to some degree. And we have to go very transparent, because those two things, transformation and transparency, really are interlinked and interchanging. And all of that, at the end of the day, is landing at the supply chain, at suppliers. And in our case, it means that around 30,000 suppliers are getting our requirements every other day, every year, and increasingly so. Yeah, so we have 130 new data points that just in the last few years we've asked our suppliers to implement. And it's clearly a huge challenge, especially for smaller companies, but it's also a big challenge for us, because we have to absorb and then make sense of all that information. I think that's the big challenge where tech for good comes together.
That's brilliant. And I think for me, what I'm hearing from you is the complexity of the digital transformation is streamlining processes, but as people, we're still the humans who have to deal with that data. And the transparency is an important piece of that road. So we're going to switch gears from the CSO perspective and come into founders and innovators in the procurement space with tech. So Mark, I would love to hear your definition of tech for good and how we can expedite sustainable procurement.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how I follow with such a succinct and descriptive part. So I'll take it maybe what it's not as well. So on the complexity side, what we do need to look from the procurement side is the multiple lenses that we're going to our suppliers with. So we're looking scope 3, we're going to be talking about diversity, we're talking human rights. We have to understand that UX for the suppliers about the changing agenda that we're going to them all the time. We can't be going with kind of one interface and one voice to them. So as well as getting the right solutions in there to drive tech for good and action, we need to make sure that we're not creating a very complex UX for our suppliers as we take the next agenda to them. I think the other part is there is sometimes a focus on dashboards and data. And I say this quite a lot every 5 weeks represents 1% of the decade. So we need to start taking action. And I think Jennifer from Unilever mentioned it very well yesterday. It's collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So we need to take that data and move it into action. Well, it's internally with our stakeholders, with our suppliers, to actually look at the value chain and how we transform it as well. I think the other thing for procurement organizations is looking at some of the leading indicators of change and transformation. So if we look at scope 3, it could be it's megatons of carbon we're taking out. But actually, it's those active collaborations you have around those categories, which are the leading indicators for change. So again, CDP and the Carbon Disclosure Project will show that in the way they report and score companies, but we need to understand the leading indicators. Otherwise, 2030 seems a long way away. We need to take the action, working with our suppliers, because that's how we remove it. But again, as we look at the other lenses, how do we turn this into action in the business and put that pressure on there as well? So I think there are a few things I'll add to it as well.
Brilliant. Lubomila, you know I'm coming to you.
Tech for good for me is what all technology should be. We need to have solutions that account for the externalities that are related to optimizing, because historically we've never been focusing on optimizing for what's good for the planet, for our society, for the governance elements of the existence of our businesses. And within the context of procurement, I would say from experience that this means taking on the journey of the transformation that businesses need to go through, be it as big as the ones that are here with us on stage, but also with the mid-sized ones, all the different stakeholders that are adding to the building blocks of your business, your scope 3, which for those of you that maybe that's not familiar, it's a big part of the emissions of a business. It is where the suppliers are sitting. The journey to become sustainable, to become a company that is leading with good in mind, means that you need to think about all these stakeholders, and technology allows for this to be done in an optimized manner.
Hearing about what it is and what it isn't and transformation, you know, being here at the conference, I hear quite a bit about an ESG journey for organizations. I hear about the procurement journey. And I really feel like on day 2, as we're talking about tech for good, it's about the impact outside the organization. So, you know, my next question for you all, and Lubomila, I'm going to start with you and work my way around, but I'm curious, what do you consider, or will you share with us what you see as best practice for tech and good?
So, for those of you that are not familiar with Plan A, we're a software as a service company that enables businesses really to track down all the steps related to their net zero journey, align to policy, and essentially transform down the line. What has become quite evident with the thousands of companies that we work with is that there's quite a few clear steps that you can take, regardless of the industry, regardless of the scale of the company, that always lead to success. The first one is related to education. It is incredibly important to align everyone in the language, but also in the understanding of what does it really mean for a company to become net zero, to become sustainable, to be leading with good practices. You would be absolutely, maybe not surprised, but in many cases it is quite shocking for the larger corporate how few of their suppliers are really familiar with ESG-related practices, and how few of them really understand even the basic concepts related to emissions or related to better governance. What this education means in practice is really creating educational programs that can align the suppliers in the context that we're speaking today to go on this journey together. Many of the businesses that we can think of that are of a large scale have net zero targets. This means that they have this North Star that they want to achieve, but thinking just of the building blocks of what it will take for this to be achieved, you also need to bring on board all these different stakeholders. So this educational piece allows for the first step, which is alignment around what needs to be achieved. The second bit, which is quite crucial, is really allowing for these stakeholders to be as excited as you are. This might sound quite qualitative, but the truth is that the longevity of the relationships that are normally built into supplier relationships between corporates, businesses, mid-sized companies and their third parties is one that should not be forgotten. You cannot overnight change these tens of thousands of organizations you've been working with, so getting them on board, getting them excited, giving them this piece of the puzzle that they can tackle is absolutely crucial. And then the final bit, which is really close to my heart, because the Flanet is really the continuous observation of all the data. If you just do assessments once a year, if you just do assessments once every 3 years, no progress can be observed. You need to focus on the details, because this is where also the challenges for the suppliers can become quite evident quite fast.
Mm-hmm. It's so fascinating. I was sitting here listening to you, and even in my question, I was talking about impact outside the organization, and your first point keeps reminding me as a practitioner inside an organization that sometimes my outside is the workforce of my supply chain. And just bringing them along that journey can have significant impact, not only for my organization, but others within that ecosystem. So thank you for that for myself. It's one of those kind of slaps on the head, like, duh, but it's an important thing to keep hearing about. Ulrike, I'm going to come back to you as kind of, the in-house of a CSO for a large multinational organization. What are you seeing as best practices of organizations, big and small, potentially leveraging tech for good?
It's a very good question, Jim, and I just reflected a bit on what we just talked about and also what I heard earlier today. And I think we often talk not so much about tech, actually, but a lot about organization, about simplification, and about collaboration. And tech is the connecting, the wiring between those two different things. And I say this because, I see this really very, very live playing out in my daily role, is that the organization of data, of processes, of governance around data, who is responsible for what, in order to improve the quality but also efficiency of sharing that, is a big part of that, making it actually happen, getting to that speed mark that you were referring to. Secondly is simplification, is how do we make it for ourselves, for our own teams, but also our suppliers, as simple as possible to share that data, right? How can we take away a lot of complexity, cottage industry of tools, of too many asks as well, and perhaps conflicting requests as well, right, for suppliers. So how can we make this, and that's what we're working on in Henkel, is to create a supplier experience in sharing and in collaborating and engaging, in particular on sustainability, that will make them want to participate, right? Not it's another task that they have to do in order to do business with us, but something that they actually experience as a positive and rewarding action to do. And then the third piece, and that's where my best practice, and I couldn't not talk about it here today, is this collaboration. You mentioned it as well, and it's part of playing with all of this, because collaboration in particular amongst the industry, amongst different peers and competitors in an industry, is helping to create a certain simplicity or a simplification of asks, of harmonizing the requirements, of helping suppliers as well perhaps to better understand what the expectations and the tools are that they can use. And so in the chemical industry, just actually today, the Together for Sustainability Collective has launched a new guidance on Scope 3 climate data, in particular product carbon emission data, and how helping suppliers in that sector to really to answer to the needs of the companies in a very harmonized way, providing an IT tool and really some guidance around it. And there could be an argument it's very slow, but then I go again and would say there's a Chinese proverb, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. So it is really important that we are making these efforts to come together and align the requirements and help suppliers to understand what they have to do and give them the tools at hand, make that simple, and organize ourselves really to really deal with it.
I go back, you started out with user experience, and I think about even me and my personal side with apps and just trying to maintain and figure out how my life connects. I can only imagine from a supplier perspective trying to work within industry how different that can be. So it's exciting to hear about the simplification of collaboration to streamline policy so that process can be automated and ideally leverage more, hopefully, for the suppliers in the ecosystem.
I could have said this in 1 minute if I had used your word.
Again, you give me the magic, and I'm trying to process real time because I've got to take action. Mark, I'm going to come to you here. What's a best practice, or what's something you're seeing you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so just building, I think the framing of these programs to suppliers is a really important part of it, but I guess building on your comments, the governance around the collaborations you have, some of the biggest challenges, if you can bring the suppliers in to do the change and maybe the innovation around the business with new technologies or processes, is also making sure your internal teams are accountable as well. And sometimes internal cross-functional teams aren't always the most accountable in the organization. So if we're looking for this change to come in and your suppliers to put the R&D and really invest in the future with you, it's about how you get that governance in there. And that gives the senior executives the understanding of what's going on in those large programs and the different projects in there. Not all of them will scale and be successful, but you have confidence on your 2030 targets and these big transformational categories as well. So that governance and process side important. The second part, and I'm sure my procurement colleagues will hopefully align with me on this, also we have to look at the commercial element. We can tell them to remove all the carbon, we can talk about the human rights and so forth, but we also have to understand the commercial part of this as well. So I think we're talking about sustainable business growth. We still want to innovate with our suppliers for new products and services in a sustainable way. And if we remove the large contracts and the things that we're doing with our suppliers today and just purely take it from a sustainability side, it's a bit Jekyll and Hyde with the suppliers. So we need to have the commercial elements to the conversation as well as the ESG agenda that we're taking to them. Otherwise, it's very hard to incentivize them when you're beating them up over here and then asking them to do more over there as well.
If I didn't know you better, I'd think you were trying to sweet talk me by talking governance. You know, I came into ESG from the governance side, so it's great to hear. And I do believe that in the decade of our lives, this is about governance, making sure aspirations turn to operations. So my next question is kind of rooted in that. And I think, Mark, I'm going to come back to you about, you were talking about action in your opening comments and level setting. And I would be curious to know, after being here, seeing what's happening in this space, what is the one thing that you will do or you believe needs to be done to make sure Tech for Good is helping us accelerate sustainable procurement?
Yeah, I think it's all about action. How is whatever the tech you're looking at going to drive into action in your organization? For me, something you could take away from today is look at your business around the scope 3, find one of those categories where it's really important to the business with low decarbonized availability, and start speaking to that group of suppliers and look at the collaborations you can start building tomorrow. So it's about the action that you can drive off the back of it. If you're doing stuff purely to monitor dashboards, great. The dashboard probably won't change unless you and the business is doing something with them. So focus on that action piece, and tomorrow think about one of those big categories that you should be starting to work on, getting some collaborations in there. Section 12 of your CDP report, your Chief Sustainability Officer will be very happy in terms of how that can improve your supplier engagement rating on there. But the more programs you can get around action, but about action and not just looking at dashboards.
And what's fascinating to me is I've been in organizations where the dashboards were thought to be the action, right? But it's so much more than that. So I appreciate.
Yeah, you need context, but
yes.
If you just wait for the perfect dashboard of your scope 3 and do nothing, 2030 is not far away. And with the new near-term science-based targets, with near-term and long-term, you have to bring your scope 3 in there, which people could define without scope 3 in the past, and they want to know the strategy of how you're moving it. So those things. And then also, how do we work together? Some of these topic areas are emerging. Human rights is something that we're all going to have to look at in the next few years in terms of the new EU directive coming through on that side. So how do we do things in a collaborative way across the industries as well?
Yeah. Lubomila, from your perspective, I may even tweak this a bit. I'd be curious to know what's one thing you're thinking about for your organization or for yourself or for those listening?
So I'm still connected to the work of businesses because that are maybe larger than us, the types of clients that we have, because I think this is where the fundamental challenge for the whole economy lies. Until we don't figure out how to decarbonize, but also align to some standards around ESG or a framework that is around goodness and being good as a business, we're not going to be able to solve the larger challenge. So The thing that we've seen works most is really breaking down this whole sustainability net zero agenda into smaller steps. One of the biggest challenges that we see that sit in front of a CSO is the idea that, okay, now I've set a net zero target, I need to put something together which probably sits in a white paper or in a big PDF for the next 50 years or for the next 30 years, and then that's kind of it. We become a bit paralyzed and we don't know how to tackle it. The only way for this agenda to really become reality by this deadline that is 2030, 40, 50, is really when you find these low-hanging fruits and then you start translating it into actions such as initiatives for your suppliers, educational programs, maybe some smaller steps where you get them to, we have clients, for example, that have what is called a board of excellence, where you have like a third party that is sitting on the outside observing your net zero success. But having these little bits and pieces that allow you to continuously understand whether you're doing well or not, and continuously being able to support also the industry on its journey. From the perspective of our own agenda, we see ourselves as a company that has a responsibility to set the scene also for our clients. We have our own science-based targets. We're top 5% B Corp in the world, and also have been part of several initiatives where we support the harmonization of certain standards. We continue to do so because we believe that if clients trust us with their sustainability, ESG data, but also with this transformation journey, that needs to come fast from us so that we can lead by example.
It's great. Your comments make me think, one of my favorite quotes is action beats inaction every time. And the sub context there is inaction is an action. And so I love the low-hanging fruit, and even if it's small progress, just keep going. It's brilliant. Ulrike, I'm going to come back from a CSO position. You've got the audience of procurement professionals, so you're speaking on behalf of all CSOs here. What's the one thing we need them to do coming out of this conference?
What I really appreciate about this coming together and these sort of conversations in a very open agenda is that there is a breaking down slowly of silos. There has been, I think, for too many years, a procurement, we heard this a number of times here today, a sort of a procurement doing things in their procurement way, right? Very much financial oriented to some degree. And it's opening up not only because we have an ESG agenda or sustainability agenda, but also because we know we have to become more adaptive, we have to become more resilient as companies and supply chains. And that is not only a duty, but I think it's absolutely an opportunity to have much more interlinkage between sustainability, so the CSO or the sustainability function, and procurement. I must say for my own company, I'm really lucky to work with a procurement team, with a leader who is absolutely committed, and it's a joy to actually move things together, and you really see how it makes a difference, because it shows the organization that this famous Scope 3, working with your suppliers, really bringing innovation, also new ideas, new ways of actually what you're procuring, how you're building your product proposition ultimately to the market, really can be driven through a very innovative and forward-looking procurement team and function. And I think that is of value to the business and to the growth of companies overall. Yeah? So procurement actually goes full circle into being an important marketing tool, I often see, because it brings new solutions to what then can happen at the retail shelf to consumers, and it's really amazing. So we've just had an example, or have an example, where we've been working through procurement with our suppliers to look at new renewable feedstock for chemical ingredients, which then ultimately on the shelf will actually give the consumer a fantastic opportunity to be, using products that have a lower product carbon footprint. And so that's what we're trying to then translate from one end to the other of the value chain, and it's really exciting. So that should be motivating for any procurement person here to be engaging in this agenda.
That's brilliant. I think for too long I've always thought of procurement as the gatekeeper to my organization to protect me. And now, at the speed of change, I can't keep up, and procurement is allowing me to find the innovation. So they're actually the enablers outside by doing that sourcing, by understanding what we need to be doing. And the critical role that you play, I hope you take quite seriously and know that we're here to engage. So we're at time, but the panelists have agreed we will be outside. If any of you have questions and would like to speak with us or share your ideas, we have probably 10 minutes. We'll be just right outside these doors, and we would love to interact with you. But thank you, and thank you to my fellow panelists for this discussion on Tech for Good.
Thank you.